organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event. Welcome to our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary.
Welcome everyone to this, the penultimate session of the month of new approaches to World Heritage and World Heritage management. I want to especially welcome you to this session and the next session, the one that will follow this, which is the session in which the youth researchers and students will produce the work that they've been doing on World Heritage sites and on new approaches to World Heritage. And I think this is one of the most important sessions that we have this month. I turned 50 earlier this year, and looking back at my career in academia and my early days as a student, I remember how enthusiastic I was and how I thought about changing the world with the new approaches that I had back then. And when I think about how significantly different the world of heritage is now, in terms of not just the way we look at World Heritage, but the way we look at society, I think issues around race and gender that exist so prominently in university settings today were issues that we didn't consider in nearly as much depth back in the early 1990s when I was at university. So I'm really excited by the fact that there's a group of young faces in front of me who will present the work that they've done. And as emerging scholars, that the work that they're presenting here will be the work that we look back on in another 30 years as the pioneering work and I think a real change in the way that we look at World Heritage. When this convention was well conceived over 50 years ago in the 1960s and going into the 70s, when it was finally brought into force, the world was a very different place. And I think that these new approaches that are emerging from this young group and through young researchers is an exciting move in an exciting direction. And I'm looking forward to, if I survive that long, the next 30 years of research that comes out of groups like this. I am going to start the presentations. We had hoped to have Krishan Mendis from Sri Lanka, but unfortunately he can't make it today. So instead, I'm going to introduce Raina Lee, who is an almost completed student at NYU. She is currently in Shanghai, but spent quite a bit of time in Abu Dhabi and on various other campuses around the NYU network. And I apologize for the butchering the name of the site, but she's going to talk about assembling fragments of a global past, the issues and challenges of Xinjiang's path to World Heritage status. She's going to look at the challenges that this site has faced in the nomination process and being presented to the World Heritage Committee in China, and look at some of the issues around civil society and the involvement of intangible aspects at the site. Raina, I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I will share my presentation now. And thank you very much for having me at this seminar. My name is Raina Lee, and I am a rising senior of art history and heritage studies at New York University, Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. And I'm currently based in my home city in China for a summer research program with the Dakara Center for Heritage Studies. And we have a group of young students and interested emerging professionals who are working on the case study of various heritage sites or prospective heritage sites around the globe. And our projects grapple with the notions and the meanings, as well as the significance of these sites, and also the issues and challenges that emerged in the process of their nominations and management. It is actually fairly late where I am now, but I am very excited to share my current research with you in its preliminary state. And my current project focuses on a very small town in the southern part of China, as well as the issues and challenges in its quest for this World Heritage status. The name of this town is Jingdezhen, and it is located in the Jiangxi province, which is about 5 hours by train from Shanghai. It is a very, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. There's a build order window from PowerPoint that's open on your presentation.
Oh, sorry. Can you see my share screen now? Do you see the full screen, or are you seeing only part of the image?
No, we're seeing your, I think if you, yeah, now we see your screen.
Okay, perfect. I think something was wrong with the editing function, but now I hope that you can see a fuller image of where Jingdezhen is. And Jingdezhen itself is not super far from where I am living right now in Shanghai. And I've been there actually 2 times to visit the city myself and engage with its local landscape. And the reason why I would be talking about Jingdezhen is that some people would argue that Jingdezhen actually figures prominently in Chinese art history and Chinese history. And also some people might even argue that it figured prominently in world history in the early modern period, because this city actually encouraged international trade and contact as the center of porcelain production. I became interested in Jingdezhen's heritage when I first learned about the blue and white aesthetics in my art history classes. I was really surprised to see ceramic dishes made in the Ottoman Empire to bear such resemblance with blue and white porcelain, which I'm familiar with, that are from China. And then, as you might see here, I do actually own a lot of these porcelain and use them in my daily life. And what I think is that it's interesting to know that Jingdezhen is famous for this blue and white porcelain and its wares, which actually inspired imitation and translation in many regions of the world. From the mid-14th century, Jingdezhen began to mass produce these kind of underglazed blue porcelain, and the scale of production was so large and concentrated in this little town that it was sometimes called one of the world's earliest industrial towns. While the official kilns in Jingdezhen produce wares for the imperial court, there is also a large number of privately owned workshops that produced items specifically for export. It is not very difficult to get a glimpse of the extent of such trans-regional trade through shipwreck evidence, through the artifacts that are excavated from these sites underwater. And it is also common to see incredible amounts of Jingdezhen porcelain in such cargoes bound for places such as Europe, in the Middle East, and also even the east coast of Africa. And thus Jingdezhen is sometimes nicknamed the city of blue and white. Yet, as I will argue later, the town's history in artistic production and its role in facilitating and catalyzing important social changes went actually way beyond the single production, the single genre of product. So far, it seems clear that as the historical hearth of porcelain production, Jingdezhen shows a number of outstanding universal values, which are key criteria for the selection of World Heritage sites. Indeed, Jingdezhen is in the process of completing its nomination file and applying for World Heritage status. Yet, as I will show later, Jingdezhen's nomination is faced with a number of challenges and issues. Starting in 2015, various official agencies in China, such as the local government of Jingdezhen, as well as the Bureau of Cultural Heritage, have been preparing the city for official nomination to UNESCO. And a series of properties from the city has been identified under the unifying theme of the imperial kiln sites of Jingdezhen, and they have been put onto China's tentative list in 2017. And according to an official document that is published just a few months ago, experts and heritage managers in China are currently finalizing Jingdezhen's official nomination to UNESCO, and the state party is hoping to officially nominate this site in the next few years. It is quite an ambitious plan for such a small town like Jingdezhen. And among all the heritage sites in the city, the nominating parties had identified this archaeological park, which is the imperial kiln sites, to be the city's key features in heritage. And now the entire nomination is centered around this archaeological park. In history, the imperial kiln factory is in operation during the Ming and Qing dynasties, roughly from the late 14th century to the early 20th century. And it is responsible as an official agency for making porcelain pieces for the imperial court. And it is also widely known for the quality of its pieces, as well as its innovation of porcelain making techniques and technologies. In addition to this archaeological park, Jingdezhen's current nomination also includes other cultural and natural sites, which intends to reflect the porcelain making system and the entire cultural landscape in history. I have been to Jingdezhen twice, and I have stayed there in an arts residency last year, which gave me plenty of time to explore the city and learn about its marvelous crafts and intangible aspects of its heritage. However, after coming back from this on-site experience and now reading about Jingdezhen's nomination, I felt that something was off. As much as I marvel at Jingdezhen's ceramic tradition and feel very proud about its progress in gaining national and international recognition for its culture, I had this feeling that the site's heritage values, as the experts defined it, do not resonate with my impressions and knowledge of the city. And after thinking about this, I realized that there seems to be something problematic with the authorized heritage discourse, which revolves around this one site and the clean-cut segment of history associated with it. All the additional sites, such as archaeological remains of civil kilns from times preceding the imperial kiln factory, as well as natural sites speaking to porcelain manufacture, and also various civil structures that are part of the cultural landscape, are all put into service of the dominant narrative, focusing on a historical institution that served the imperial court and only the imperial court. And in other words, what could have been read as the autonomous heritage values of these quote unquote minor sites and public spaces had been tailored to fit a predetermined storyline that prioritizes the monumentality of the archaeological finds over the vibrancy of civil spaces, such as guild halls and waterways, whose uses are often multiple and thus more nuanced. And by focusing only on the elite structures with clear ties to material evidence, such as the Imperial Kiln Factory, Jingdezhen's World Heritage nomination enshrines one version of the city's heritage at the expense of many others. And it also subjugates originally mutually constitutive modes of ceramic production, the interaction between the official and civil kilns, and also multiple ways of life to a hierarchy of values, which, although I think it gives the nomination file a sense of clarity and focus, actually flattens Jingdezhen's multifaceted cultural identity. And also more is to be examined around the issues of authenticity and integrity, which also figure prominently into any World Heritage nomination. And looking at these high-rise buildings and modern tourist attractions built around the Imperial Kiln Archaeological Park, I began to wonder how the locals felt about Jingdezhen's quest for World Heritage status. how do the modern practitioners of ceramics in Jingdezhen conceptualize their city's heritage, especially the heritage related to porcelain? And this question brings me to my current research project, which attempts to document and examine the ways in which diverse voices and localized understandings of Jingdezhen's porcelain heritage and how it could enhance or challenge the official narratives that are fashioned surrounding the site's outstanding universal value. And in the following months, I will be traveling to Jingdezhen and conducting oral history interviews with various local stakeholders, including former workers from state-owned porcelain factories and art students from local universities specializing in the ceramic craft, and also independent artists and entrepreneurs who design and market their own products, and also collectors and sellers of antique porcelain who are based in Jingdezhen. And I also would like to know about how they feel about Jingdezhen's future on this world stage of heritage governance. And I believe that Jingdezhen's value and its heritage lie not in the blue and white stickers put in every taxi and on every street light in the city. And I think Jingdezhen's heritage lives in people's stories and their opinions. And while these localized oral histories are in no way meant to be comprehensive or generalizable in a statistical sense, I think they deserve to be heard by an international audience. And this is the focus of my paper and what I'm striving to do in my future projects. And thank you very much for listening. I'll stop sharing now.
Thanks, Raina. I must say, I always find the World Heritage sites that exist in parts of the world that I've never visited and are part of a history that I don't know as well as I would like and as I should to be of real interest. And I'm interested to see that you've picked up in the work that you're doing many of the issues that have arisen through the presentations that have taken place over the last month and the ideas of what constitutes World Heritage and who decides what World Heritage is and how all of those values can be put together to enhance and deepen World Heritage sites and make them relevant to, I think, a much more universal audience and really take into account the people who live at those sites and engage with those sites on a daily basis. So thank you very much for that, and good luck for the future research. I look forward to hearing about that in the near future.
Thank you. Very excited to share as updates come up.
I know it's late there, so I'm not sure if you will be able to stay on for the complete session. So if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask or any comments that they would like to make, perhaps now is a good time to do it before we move on to the next group of presentations.
Yes, I would like to know at what point is the path towards the World Heritage status? Because you're talking of a path to World Heritage status. What is the point where you are now?
In terms of the values
did you already apply for the nomination or what?
I think Jingdezhen has been on the tentative list for quite a long time, and it is now a very strong public program to push Jingdezhen towards final nomination in the past in the next 2 years. And I think as Jingdezhen moves towards its final stage of its nomination, there is certain to be drastic changes for these sites, and also I would say a lot of authoring of heritage values and also promotion of these values almost as the city's signature. And I think this is an important thing to consider in terms of what it means to the local community. And would you mind repeating the last bit of your question? My internet here wasn't very good. I didn't hear the last bit of your question.
No, my question is aimed to understand how, how this city thinks to reach a World Heritage status. In other terms, what is the outstanding universal value they are proposing? It's clear it's the capital of porcelain, But as you know, unfortunately, and this is one of the big limitations of the World Heritage List, uh, you need to define a space. You need to define physical structures that make evident, that express, this role of capital of the porcelain. It reminds me another nomination, for instance, in Bahrain, Muharraq. It was inscribed as the city of the pearling activities. The activities related to the fishing, to the of the pearl, to the work of the pearl, to the preparation of the pearl, and so on. But in the end, they have identified a number, 17 sites, where these activities, the economy and the culture of the pearl, was expressed. Is it the same in? I'm not able to, to repeat the name of your Chinese city. But is it the same in your case, or no? I would like to understand this.
It is very similar in the case of Jingdezhen. So there are not only kiln sites, but also places where the kaolin comes from, and also like maybe docks and guild halls where trade
Okay.
happened.
Mhm.
But the main issue was that Jingdezhen actually had a porcelain making history that is longer than the period that has been proposed in the nomination file. And Jingdezhen has been making porcelain since the Song dynasty and also from earlier, but this file only focused on the later dynasties and almost put the earlier period of production as supplementary to what has been proposed.
Okay.
And in this way, I think it doesn't do justice to the vibrancy of the cultural scene there and also the entire history of artistic production. So this is one issue that I'm trying to consider in my paper, and
Yeah.
also seeing how the locals respond to porcelain making. Is it associated with one period of time in history? Is it associated with one specific product or one aesthetic? Or is it still something that is pretty much going on and living through people's lives? And
Yeah.
this is something that I'm very interested in.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking.
Thanks.
Raina, just one question for Raina. I would like to know about the civil society role in this process. Are they okay with the idea of just preserving one specific time on of the local culture, or they are they have the same idea of you that were very interesting, and I support your idea, of course, but I would like to know more about the participatory process. If you reach people, and what are they thinking about that?
Yeah, actually, I am going to Jingdezhen next month to start my data collection. So I am now in the process of contacting my interviewees, and I have a list of 11 interviewees from all different sectors, from tourism to academia. And I'm not exactly sure as to how exactly they would respond to this question. So this is something to be explored in next month. But I do think that there is civil society interest in this process of applying, but on the contrary, there seems to not be a platform where these voices could be heard systematically, because the nomination file for Jingdezhen was actually written by a research institute in Beijing, and most of the activity does not really happen on site. And even for archaeology, which leads the project, first and foremost, local communities don't really have access to most of the archaeological digs. They could see things in the museum, but they wouldn't know what are the precise plans for archaeological surveys, for example, and how that would figure into their current lives. And this is one question that I would definitely ask. And hopefully I will also ask about their stories and how they engage with these sites. Do these sites actually speak for the values that have been described? Or do these sites mean completely different things to what was written on the file? And I think this would be interesting to present to the international audience, and also as a way to raise awareness that civil society in China is actually actively participating in the heritage process. Just as sometimes we also need to look at the nuances of this process and how people are engaging, sometimes not on the official level, but I do believe that whatever discussion happens online is a very interesting source of data and should be discovered and explored and shared.
Mhm. Yes, I agree. I think that it would be very interesting if you interview people that produce the porcelain and also commercialize them because they probably have a lot to say about that, about the feeling that they have of producing and if they are proud of it. And I think it would be very interesting to have those interviews. So good luck with your work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick message to the attendees. I don't think that we can access your microphones, so if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Professor Pini to present an introduction to his group of students who have been working in Bologna.
Yes, thank you. So the two presentations are the outcomes of a short research work carried out in the course of urban planning in the framework of a master program of management of cultural activities and institutions. So the works of these students are not works of architects or planners, but are works of students who attended a course in urban planning. Uh, Both presentations deals with the two aspects of nomination of a candidature for a nomination to the World Heritage Site carried out by the municipality of Bologna in Italy. And maybe is important to say a few words about the specificity of this city, Bologna, who is a leader in Italy as for urban planning and especially urban conservation. Bologna, since the 70s, established a master plan that, like in every other cities of Italy, also includes specific regulation and specific measure of protection and revitalization, if needed, of the historic cities. So urban conservation in Italy is fully integrated in the normal and more general urban planning process. Monica was asking me about the buffer zone. We don't have the concept of the buffer zone. I mean, or if we have, they are totally useless because in reality, the buffer zones are defined by the regulations, by the measures of protections, which are implicit and in the zoning of the master plan and in the other regulations of the master plan. So Bologna carried out since the 70s a very an impressive policy of urban rehabilitation and urban conservation and valorization of the historic center. To many extent, it was considered as a model for many reasons that I don't want to, we don't have time to explore. But I would like to underline that it was the first city that used social housing programs in order to rehabilitate and in order to upgrade the living conditions and also to ensure the physical preservation of the historic center. And to this extent, it has also a very important, it used to have a very important experience in terms of participation, political involvement of the population, and so on. Now these features are a little bit less evident, but still exist a very strong sense of citizenship and a very strong interest of the population in the action of the municipality. So it's quite surprisingly, the municipality of Bologna applied for the tentative list in 2006 and propose as world to reach a World Heritage status, not for the whole of the historic center, as it happened in many other Italian cities, but only for a component of the historic center. That is the system of the porticos, which is a very specific feature of Bologna, you will see. And the porticos of Bologna have been proposed as the feature to be inscribed in the World Heritage List, the tentative list in 2006, but it was only 2 or 3 years ago that Bologna really undertook the process for the nomination. So the nomination took into consideration not as much the whole system of the porticos, which in my opinion would have been much more interesting, but only some sections of this system, which are representative of the different period of the urban evolution, and which are representative of also of the different quarters of the city. The outstanding universal value of the porticos of Bologna makes reference indeed to at least two main aspects. The first one is that the porticos have characterized all the period of development of the city since the medieval times until today. And the second is that the porticos are not as much, are not only an infrastructure, are not only a physical structure, but are also a very important and essential space of social interaction where people lives, where people works, where people has the real sense of belonging to Bologna. So from this point of view, the nomination was quite interesting. It identified 12 different sections of the porticos, and for that reason is technically what is called a serial nomination. And the presentation we will see, the students have taken into exams just each two sections you will see. One is the section of the university quarter in the historical center, and is a very monumental kind of monumental porticos. And the other one is a very recent portico built in the 60s in a social housing quarter in the periphery of the city. It is important to know that in the planning tools of the city of Bologna, in the recent planning tools of the city of Bologna, the perimeter of the historic city has been sensibly extended, and it includes not only the historic center built within the former city walls circle, but it also includes several quarters in the periphery that have reached, in a way, a sort of heritage status in the sense that are representative of specific political and social phases of development of the city. And therefore, even the porticos of the 60s, you will see, are part of the historic city. And therefore, they are submitted to very stringent, clear measures of protection. I leave the I give the floor to the two teams. The first one, I think we start with the porticos of Via Zamboni, the porticos of the quarter of the university. So the three students are talking of their home in a way. No, they don't live there, but they spend a lot of time under these porticos. And it's quite interesting the kind of work they have done trying to understand the reactions of the population, the reaction of the different, let's say, of the civil society to this idea of World Heritage nomination and to the possible consequences. Please, who's speaking? Betül, Pauline, Judith, who starts?
Yes, we are going to share our presentation.
Pauline is French, Betül is Turkish, and Judy is Catalan, not Spanish. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you see?
Full screen, please, Pauline.
Yes, of course. I just wanted to check if the condivision works. Can you see our first slide?
I can see it.
All right. So we are the group of students of the University of Bologna in Italy. As our professor introduced, we are doing a master degree in innovation and organization of culture in the arts, also called JOCA. And we are going to talk about the porticos of Bologna, and our group will focus on the porticos of Via Zamboni. So first of all, welcome to Bologna. We prepared a little introduction too, but I think I will just briefly say that Bologna is the seventh biggest city in Italy, and it is renowned for many things, including these porticos, and you can now see it on the left. So porticos are this specific type of architecture with the shape of an arch, and it's also a very peculiar type of urban space, because when you're walking out there, you are both walking outdoor, but also you are sheltered from the sun, from the rain, so it's quite nice. And the porticos you can see on the left are one type of portico, which is located in Via Zamboni, but as our professor said, there is a big diversity of porticos. In total, there are about 40 kilometers of porticos in the city, and it's a big symbol actually, so it was nominated to be part of UNESCO World Heritage List. And our work in the framework of the class of urban planning that we had was to assess this nomination. About these porticos, Via Zamboni, as our professor also introduced, is a big symbol of the city's identity because it's hosting the university's headquarters, which is a very big university in Italy, and therefore it has a very high cultural value. About us, well, we were also introduced, so we are a trio of students from very different countries and also with very different backgrounds. So Betul studied law, Judith studied mainly history, and I studied mainly sociology in my bachelor. Now, a few words about our methodology to do this work. So three main axes of our methodology were, first of all, our personal experience as students in Bologna. So our own perception of what is a portico and what it means for the city. Also field research, both on internet and on site. So we also went there, tried to understand how it was communicated, this nomination, and how people were perceiving it. And the third method we used was virtual interviews through a Google survey that we created to ask some questions to people from Bologna, but also international like workers or students living in Bologna. So as you can guess, in many different works like that, we had to deal with resources and also with constraints. Resources such as our class of urban planning, but also our own experiences and contacts, and constraints which were mainly the pandemic going on and which prevented us to work really more on field and to do interviews in live, let's say. So that was a brief introduction, and now we're going to move to the first part of our work, which was the investigation.
Yes, so about the investigation, we just focus on the executive summary. The executive summary is the name that it gave the candidature to this document, and it's important to say that it was not all the porticos of all the city of Bologna. So in this executive summary, it was saying the specific description of the different porticos that they were included, and my group and I, we are going to focus on the specific part of Via Zamboni. Another important thing about this executive summary, it was the outstanding universal value criteria, and they were focused on point 2 and point 4 because they emphasized the development in the architectural and town planning, and also corresponding to the significant stage in human history, as we focus a lot on the social interactions and the history around the Via Zamboni porticos. So for us, these two criteria, they were super important for the zone of Via Zamboni. And now I'm going to briefly explain a little bit about the historical perspective that Via Zamboni have around this port, like around the porticos of Via Zamboni. Here, as you can see, there is this red line that it's the zone that the candidature decided that it will observe more in detail about Via Zamboni. I don't know if you are familiar with Via Zamboni in Bologna, but it's a long street. And for the candidature, the description of this part, it was just this red line. And as you can see here, there is Museo di Palazzo Poggi. There is also Teatro Comunale di Bologna, on what you can see like the blue dot. So these are important institutions around this street. And now you will understand a little bit better why I'm pointing out these two things, because it's an important part of the historical perspective and the historic narrative of the street. To talk about the historical perspective, I'm going to be so brief because we will spend a lot of time talking about important historical events on this street. But I wanted to say that the architecture and the social function change a lot during the time. So we see a lot of different changes between the from Middle Age until the 19th century. One important date is to 1250, where it was the first time where Bologna legislation talks about the porticos. And they said that the porticos were considered public land, but they will need to be built and paid by private individuals. To know better about this, we focus on the specific history about one palace that is called Palazzo Poggi. I think that we can have the picture of Palazzo Poggi. I'm not sure. Yes, as you can see in this picture, exactly. So the Palazzo Poggi is important because in this area of Bologna, it was powerful. It was an area of a lot of different power. It was the family Bentivoglio. It was a powerful family in Bologna where they created a palace. This palace get ruined. So it was Poggi, the family Poggi, who decided to bring back power on the zone. And this is important for us because we get more in depth to know exactly what the changes in front of this Palazzo Poggi happen for the porticos. So for example, in the beginning, the porticos of Palazzo Poggi were part of the individual residence. But later on, Palazzo Poggi right now is a museum, but in 1711 was converted also in a part of academic. It was called the Institute of Science. This institute bring again another function to the portici because the portici were not more individual for the private residence of Palazzo Poggi, were again for the students because the students were in front of this palace. So the social function of the porticos itself changed a lot during the time. So our research was focused just on this palace because we couldn't get more in depth to know other palaces. But for example, on this same street, we have other institutions, as for example, the Library of University of Bologna, or for example, the Teatro Comunale, that is a communal theater, as you can see on the image. So we get focused just in Palazzo Poggi to understand how the porticos in front of Palazzo Poggi changed during time. But it could be super interesting for us also knowing how the portices in front of other buildings on this street has been changing and change also the architectural. So now we're going to focus more on the social part of these porticos around the Zamboni.
Okay, so we had a chance to talk about the history of this zone, and now we arrive to our little field work. And due to the constraints that Pauline mentioned in the beginning, we were able to contact mainly people we know and people we can have a contact during those difficult times of the pandemic. And we contacted 10 people from different ages. The youngest group was from the 18 to 35 years old group, and the oldest people we talked to were from the 50-75 group. And we asked them many questions to understand about also their feelings and what they think about this zone, as well as the candidature of the porticos of Bologna. And in this slide, you can see that we a word cloud, where I don't know if you're familiar with how the word clouds work, but we asked every participant to give us 3 words that they associate with the porticos of Bologna, and especially with the Via Zamboni. And you can see the most frequent answers are the bigger words. So there's Bologna, there's il paro, which is shelter, that also Pauline used this word when she was describing the porticos. There is rain, there is protection, and there's friendship. So also in the little words, you can see a lot of words that's related to the social life and the life of porticos in Via Zamboni. And in the next slide, there are some quotes from some of the first memories under the porticos Via Zamboni. And the first quotation talks about the sense of independence this person felt when they walked under the porticos. And the second one talks about going out and meeting a lot of random people under the porticos. As Judith explained, this is a historical social function that we see around the porticos. And as you can see, the last one talks about the memories of university and hanging there with a lot of students. And then the next slide. We also asked questions about their awareness, people's awareness about the UNESCO site. This was also our concern to understand how these processes are communicated to the society, to the local people, and we can say that our 10 responses, the 20% said no, the others, the majority knew it. Maybe Judith will have time to explain in the communication part the fact that the communication style adopted by the municipality did not really include a kind of it does include a good way of communicating to the society's part where elder people, they don't usually have access to digital channels, digital communication ways. So more elder respondents were not aware of the candidature.
Okay. Yeah. So we go to the no, it's not over.
Yeah, I will. No, it's okay, it's okay. It's also we because I was confused. It's okay, Pauline, because I acted like it finished. Okay, in this part, we also asked about what do they think about the potential opportunities and threats that would come with the enlistment of the porticos of Bologna in the UNESCO Heritage List. And we summarize these answers in these two columns. And to go over quickly, the opportunities were seen as better maintenance for these historical sites, the increase of tourism in a positive way, thanks to having a monument, a UNESCO monument in the city. Also, this might also trigger a kind of an interest for those who are not familiar with the porticos. Also, another feeling that we found that our respondents talked about was a kind of a pride that they would feel to see the value of their city recognized in this official way. Whereas the threats we're talking about, of course, the increase of circulation under the porticos that I think Pauline will talk about it in her part in a bit more detail, and also about the increasing anthropic pressure in the city center, and a kind of an opposition to the UNESCO effect. Okay, there could be more tourists, but will they become really engaged tourists about this site and really engaged about the history, or will it be just a moment where they take a photo, they will not pay attention, and they will just pass away? And also another point, which is this is always concerning us as students, the increasing cost of life general in Bologna, which has been a trend in the past years. And the fact that there could be a UNESCO enlisted monument such as porticos would contribute to that.
All right. Sorry for the interruption before. So here comes the second part. After the investigation, we wanted to put a little bit of our critical feedback regarding this nomination. Sorry for the noise that you can hear behind me. Basically, I will introduce our reflection and main questions about this candidature. The first question we wanted to ask ourselves, but also that we discussed in class, why this portion of Via Zamboni porticos was chosen, because at first sight, as Judith already said, it's not really representative of the rich diversity of Via Zamboni, which is a very long street, and the portion was delimited around the main institutions, so it was really a specific type that was chosen. So why actually this specific choice, which is maybe not representative? History elements can allow us to understand some of the explanations of why choosing this. So Judith already talked a little bit about that, and I think we are being a bit long. So I will not go so much into this question, but we can discuss it later. I will rather go directly to this one. We wanted to highlight especially the concept of physical integrity. When we talked about porticos and public space, it's a bit of a tricky concept. So we wanted in our work to acknowledge different narratives on the same issues. So on this slide, you can have very A clear example with two extremes of the same action, which is considered in different ways. So what you see on the left could be actually considered street art. It's a very nice painting that was actually commissioned by the university and that is not protected. It's part of the street. It will not be removed. And this is art. On the right, instead, you can see that this street, which is really lived and owned by students, it's often used to spread political messages and also other kind of illustration, paintings, graphs. All these kind of actions of like writing on the walls is usually called vandalism, because as you can see also on the top of the picture, it's visible that it has been asked to cover some of the messages. So you have like a kind of a degradation of the aesthetic of the walls that is people basically write and then it's sanctioned, it's recovered, and then people write again, because actually the street works like that. So every morning you can arrive and see new messages, new drawings. It's really interesting to see the dynamic between expression and just being how do you say, censored in a way. It's a form of censorship. So street art versus vandalism. And the last thing about physical integrity, it's what about human gatherings, because as we can guess, in a street that is fully lived by students, it's also very vibrant at night. I mean, day and night, actually. This picture shows Piazza Verdi at night. It's a very symbolic place of the student life. It's located directly next to Via Zamboni, and it's often full of people. So in a way, it's an opportunity because it's really symbolic of Bologna's dynamism and way of life. So we are living outside. Porticos are really experienced by people. But we can also see the threat side of it, because we can imagine that all these students, they are here enjoying maybe the night, and they will leave the place, maybe leaving the trash, maybe leaving some damage. So they are not really taking on their mind the physical integrity of the place. So we can see that this specific aspect of Bologna's way of life maybe can be seen as a threat also. Threat versus opportunity, there's again an ambiguity, and it's very ambivalent. That was part of our reflection in the critical feedback. And now I think we are moving to Judith's part again.
Yes. So also another thing that we ask ourselves is like it's like the question, like this sentence, as you can see in Italian, is like it is the portico, it is like the porticos, like the real region, like is porticos the real region, like the real reason about this essential character of Bologna. And we ask a lot this question to ourselves, because as you will probably know, like around Italy we have other cities and other places where porticos are also in the city center, or other around Europe also we have like other places where porticos are around the city. So then we divide it with tangible aspects and intangible aspects. So we thought that tangible aspects, like it is important, it's part of the Bologna urban fabric, this diversity of architecture and this diversity of different porticos around the city, and also the practical function, as every like people that live in Bologna, like the porticos are so useful because when it's raining you are never getting wet. So it's a part of also a practical function of the architecture of the porticos. But also for us it was so important to focus on the intangible aspects, because of course on these porticos there are happening a lot of different things that we cannot actually see it as just architectural. They are also having a lot of different, as Pauline was saying before, a lot of different social events, a lot of different social things. And also in the porticos there are also a lot of different cultural events happening, as for example the porticos in front of a museum, in front of a theater. So a lot of social activities and practices are happening also under the porticos. So for this reason, like we put this quote of this historian, like of these two. And also the last question that we ask ourselves, it was how has been this communicated to the people. We were so focused to trying to understand if just we know, like us as a student, we know this because of our class, but also what happened with other students or the citizens of Bologna. So at the beginning, we discovered that like the candidature was mostly communicated online in digital newspaper and social media. The Bologna government decided to do kind of like a Facebook campaign, that it was pretty active on Facebook, and a lot of different hashtags were using on that moment. Also, they did something super interesting, that it wasn't a participatory activity, that it was that the citizens of Bologna could do an appointment and talk with someone from the government to talk about the different preservation plans or different initiatives or suggestions to preserve the porticos. That we thought that it was super interesting, but it was kind of like a difficult process. As Betul was saying before, it was more focused for people that it's like so used to technology, so used to get involved. Even if it was like an actual meeting and an actual appointment, it was difficult to get into the point to talk with someone. And also another thing that we got a little bit confused is that the media in general get also a little bit of misleading information, because the information was that the porticos, the 42 kilometers of porticos around Bologna, were in the candidature. So at the beginning of the candidature, it was confusing even for the population to understand if it was selected porticos, if it was all the porticos, if it was every portico of Bologna. So we get kind of like a different perspective about communication of the campaign. It seemed that they wanted to involve all the citizens, but we had some problems, and also the media get confusing. And this small extract, as you can see, is part of like this confusing media at the beginning of the campaign. And now we'll talk about the conclusions.
Okay, very quickly, we can say that this has been a very cool initial work to perhaps one day turn that into an in-depth future field work. So we would propose that, and if the municipality of Bologna is interested, of course, we are giving our service for that also with the other group, that to understand also the social dimension of this candidature and the evaluation. As a final thought, we think we realize that the documents, the criteria of the UNESCO's documents I'm referring to, they would need to include more innovation about also including and understanding the values, the spirit and the tradition, as it's quoted in the charter, to understand and evaluate an urban context and an urban value, because we have these differing values, just Pauline mentioned, to call something strictly vandalism or to acknowledge the value of the political the graffiti and the tags as a part of their social function. These are question marks that remained with us. And as a final note, Professor Pini mentioned that in the last month, it was announced that the candidature is not rejected, but the municipality of Bologna has 1 more year to redo the dossier. So they say that the portices and the porticos and the value of the porticos are recognized, but they have to redo the dossier. And thank you for listening to us.
Thank you. I think we can continue with the next presentation on Bologna, and then maybe have a general discussion, if you agree. Jonathan, what do you think?
Yes, I think given our time constraints, we should continue.
Yeah, okay. So, Francesco, Martino.
Okay, so I try to share the screen.
Emanuele.
Okay. Ah, wait, spoiler. Okay.
Okay, so I guess we can start. And so we're going to talk about the set of porticos that is Treno della Barca. And so we called it the Boulevard of Broken Dreams. And you're going to understand why later. And
we explain that the Barca is the name of the quarter, and Treno is the popular name of the porticos.
Of the set of porticos, exactly. Yes, yes. And so we are Martino, Francesco, and Emanuele, 3 students from the University of Bologna. And go on, Emma. Next slide. Okay, so basically we're going to focus on Treno della Barca. As Professor Pini was telling you, this is a set of porticos that is located in a peripheral zone of the city, so it's not into the city center. And it's really recent because it was built in the 60s. It was part of a social housing project. In fact, the porticos are composed of two different parts. Above, you have this kind of houses in which people live. And on the bottom part, you have this kind of shops that are hosted inside of the porticos. And another important thing, and it's really interesting, is the fact that those porticos are not linked to other porticos or structures, which is pretty uncommon because all the other 12 parts that are not nominated basically compose a sort of interconnected porticos structure. And this is really, you're going to see in the next slide, which is the graphical identification of the part, which the fact that it's something that is completely not linked with anything else. So you have the buffer zone that is indicated by the boundaries in yellow, and the nominated zone, which is in purple. And this is a picture taken from the candidature. So you can see also how they decided to identify graphically and visually the porticos of Treno della Barca.
Regarding the outstanding universal value, all the porticos, and in particular the Portico of Bologna, has been classified for, nominated for the criteria number 2, so the uniqueness of the place for the flourishing of social life, and the criteria number 4, so as a concrete example of the development of a traditional type of urban architecture. We analyzed the candidate, and we saw that regarding the permitting elements and social urban use of the porticos, the candidate is coherent. So the Tenera Barca is an example of portico of this typical type of construction outside the city center. So it's something that we can see also outside the city center, not just in the medieval city, and as a great environment for the for social life. Then regarding the long span of time, we had some doubts about its uniqueness, because we arrived at the conclusion that it's difficult to believe that there are no other examples of porticos outside the walls. In fact, there are also other examples, not as Tenora Barca, but, and I link with the other point, this kind of structure from an architectural point of view is not so unique, so not so extraordinary to justify a candidature for UNESCO. And then regarding the use of the portico, we found it is as very common and ordinary, and not characterizing the candidate.
Okay, so we developed different study typologies in order to assess the several aspects concerning the site. And first of all, we carried out field research on the porticos to assess the integrity of the site. We have discovered that the functional integrity is still respected, because porticos are still a public space which is open for social life of the inhabitants, even if it is seriously endangered by the several closures of the local businesses, and we will talk about it more in depth later. Even if there are several ethnic mini markets that are replacing the old shops, but we have, let's say, interpreted this phenomenon as an example of cultural diversity. Concerning chronological integrity, it is also fully respected. We have found some historical pictures of the portico in Archer archives, which correspond to the actual shape of Treno della Barca. And whereas concerning physical integrity, the adjacent park, the park which is in front of the porticos, is in good conditions, but we cannot affirm the same thing for the portico itself. And here it is just a picture of a box which should be used in order to let's say host flowers. But as you can see, it is filled with concrete. But there will be other example during the presentation. Okay, okay. During our field research, we also have submitted a questionnaire to the local people, the local workers that are, for example, in the shops and so on, in order to understand how they feel, which is their connection with the site. And several interesting answers were revealed. For example, the fact that there is a strong belongingness by the inhabitants with the portico. A lot of them consider the Treno della Barca as home, and also the ethnic communities that are present there. They have this feeling towards the site. But there are, of course, also some complaints, some critical points that we will develop. As you can read, and as you also have seen before, the physical maintenance and cleanness of the site is a very critical point. The 57% of them desire new local activities, local economic activities. The 27% of them needs more safety and controls in the area, and most of all, Archer, but we will explain later the role of this entity, is interpreted as an obstacle for the growth, the local growth. The other thing that we have discovered is that the citizens were trust a lot in the UNESCO candidature. They thought that it could improve the situation of the neighborhood. But we have seen that only the Italian workers were involved by UNESCO representatives or by the municipality, whereas the ethnic communities were not contacted by them.
Regarding the elements affecting the property, as Emanuele mentioned, the structure is not well preserved. There is an overall deterioration situation in the of Tenela Barca, but these damages are of course due to perennial lack of conservation of measures. But at the same time, these are these damages due to their physical nature are not irreversible. So measures can be done to try to solve the situation. Then, on the other hand, regarding the social texture, there is a situation of dismantlement. So there is a perennial process of depopulation that is decreasing the overall number of inhabitants of the Treno Barca. And this process of depopulation is due mostly on the increasing lack of job opportunities and not stimulating economic environment. So these damages, these problems are hard to repair. It needs a pluriannual plan, a long-term plan for trying to solving these problems, because the risk that is currently a problem is the ghettoization. So Treno Barca and the neighborhood of Barca could become a ghetto, so completely closed from the center, completely disconnected, without opportunities to interact and also to grow and to exit from this this situation of poverty and the lack of jobs.
Okay, we've studied also the legal protection of the site, and at the end we have discovered that the legal protection of the porticos are quite sufficient on all the levels, more or less, both the national level, so thanks the Italian Code for Cultural Heritage, which protects so the cultural heritage in the country. Also, at a regional level, there is a quite effective regional law, and also at the municipal level, we have several legal instruments as I portici, istruzioni per l'uso, and another kind of regulation. And another interesting outcome of our research was the presence of different organization, not for-profit organization, which were focusing on Treno, so in at a local level, as Banca del Tempo Reno Borgo and Riprendiamoci il Treno, which organize several activities in order to involve the citizens and the local community in order to take care all together on the maintenance and the cultural activities present in the site.
And regarding the conservation of the site, the structure has been invented by the municipality as structure 451. But actually, besides this inventory, this listing, there is no other measures in order to show and to represent officially the Treno alla Barca. In fact, it's completely ignored by municipality. There is no mention at all in the Bologna Open Portici database, which is a database, online database, where all the information regarding the most important porticos are gathered. So this is a problem when you try to candidate this portico. Then regarding the present state of conservation, we'll see some photos, but there are cracks on the walls, missing plaster, as Emanuele showed, flower pots filled with concrete, holes in the pavement, so a really bad situation. Last but not least, conservation measures. Emanuele mentioned the guideline I portici istruzioni per l'uso, but actually it is a guideline for citizens. So nothing made by institutions. And the great measure, the only great measure, is an investment of 583,000 euros for restoring the 12th empty shop and for boosting the economy in Treno alla Barca, especially for the candidature. But actually, besides this great investment, there were no further measures. So as we can see in the next slide, this is the actual state of conservation. So holes in the pavement, these bad flower pots, these neglected courtyards, and so these are the photos of what is the situation right now.
Okay, so regarding the management aspects of the candidature, from an organizational perspective, the municipality has decided to design this specific and opposite office, which is coupled with cabina di regia, basically a sort of steering committee. This office is formed by all the entities that have contributed to the candidature of the porticos. And another important and interesting aspect is the fact that the only mention of management aspects in the candidature is this ipotesi istruzioni per l'uso that you heard a lot about in the previous presentation part of the presentation. And basically, it's important because porticos have a peculiar juridical nature. They are privately owned but publicly used. So the municipality has decided to create a set of guidelines for the use and the maintenance of the porticos and all the possible interventions that people can do, and which are the desired also interventions, what they can do, what they cannot do. It really depends also on the historical and cultural values that each portico has. And but we found out an important thing in the whole candidature, the fact that there are a lot of lackings since the Trenos specificities are not taken into account, as well as specificities of many other set of porticos, and no initiatives were designed for Treno. And we also found out this hindering role of Acer, which is a public entity that should contribute to the housing or to manage the housing projects into the city. And talking with the people, that the inhabitants of Treno della Barca, they told us that basically the costs of renting were too high, and it was really difficult for them to make interventions or to refurbish the porticos. So we are almost at the end of it. So the conclusions, just to sum up all the things that we said, this candidature, in our opinion, is really innovative and brave, and it has also a lot of problems because regarding Treno, we found out this kind of lack of physical maintenance, this ambiguous role of Acer, as I just said. There's no specific management plan, nor for the Treno della Barca or any other set of porticos that were candidated. There's really little involvement of civil society in this part. As we said, this is a peripheral zone of the city. And yeah, as also our colleagues said before, the candidature is now in standby. They really need to integrate more documents, to make more studies on it, some more analysis. And so we're going to see what's going to happen. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emanuele, Francesco, and Martin. Great work.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to allow 2 minutes of questions, and then we'll move on to the next set of presentations, and we can discuss these porticos at the end as well. Thank you for those presentations, really fascinating. I personally, I like the kind of opposite looking and probably socially opposite sets of porticos, one in what appears to be in the very old city and one in the new. And it would be interesting to hear more about how those social dynamics work. I assume that in the old city, there's a lot more tourism, whereas daily life goes on maybe in the other, in the areas around the other porticos. So are there any burning questions or comments that anyone from the panel has, or from the attendees? If you could put that in the chat.
Do you like me to
Yes, please go ahead.
That's my question. Thank you. Well, after seeing Raina presentation and also presentation of Pauline, the two, and Julia, Justine, I had the impression that something is a little bit in common. There is something a little bit in common with the process of indications of Jean Deisen and Bologna to the heritage list. I think that both face perhaps the same challenge or something very similar in the way that those choices of are mainly prioritizing the monumentality of tangible expressions of a given historical period in detriment of a broader vision of the local history. And especially in Bologna, there is a concern and there is a view of the population that this is not the case. So I would like to ask about this choice. Did this choice come from local experts or the state parties, the initial choice, I mean, or the UNESCO experts?
I can maybe start to answer, but maybe some of the parts, and Professor Pini might be more aware of the choices parts, but when we're basing our opinions and our research on the executive summary, where they kind of summarize the motivations of the justifications of protection of the porticos of Bologna, we see that they refer to the historicity and the architectural value. And this is also connected with the previous question of Marina, that they also mentioned the social aspect as well, but I'm not clear how in the real candidature dossier, the values, the current values are integrated to the historicity of these social functions as well as the architectural ones. So I'm not aware, I don't know about the choices of the experts on this, but I know that the municipality of Bologna prepared this dossier, and they of course talked with architects and I'm assuming other experts. But in our executive summary, the panel or the team of experts are not clearly mentioned. So I don't know if any of my colleagues know about these details, but I can answer it from the executive summary point of view.
Monica, no, I can reply to your question. Well, indeed, there were no UNESCO experts involved in the preparation of the nomination at all. I think that Bologna was forced to enter the tentative list because it was one of the very few important historic cities of Italy that was not at all interested and involved in the World Heritage status. And it was a little bit a scandal because Bologna is one of the largest and most and better preserved historic cities in Italy. You know that in Italy there are 52 World Heritage sites whose 30 are cities, not monuments, but cities. And Bologna was not there. So I think it was forced in a way to enter the tentative list. And then this is interesting. They decided to proceed and with the nomination because in the very last few years, let's say the last 3 or 4 years, Bologna started to have also a tourism economy. Bologna was ignored by tourists until 3 or 4 years ago. It's a city that was very well known for the food, for the for the people who is very friendly and so on, but nobody really considered Bologna as a tourist destination. In the last 4 years, the situation has changed, and I think that the candidature was also linked to this process of, if I may say, touristification of Bologna, if I may say. So the dossier that we never seen because it was a secret in reality Betul always speaks of executive summary. Indeed, the executive summary is the only document we had directly from the architect of the municipality who was in charge with the preparation of the nomination, and that's all. So, I mean, the dossier was completely prepared by one architect of the municipality in contact with the Italian Commission, UNESCO Commission. That's all. So I think that also this explains the lack of a real involvement, of the population. The communication, as they have said, was mostly online, and there is a very beautiful website of the municipality, and that's all. So I think that I mean, there's no comparison with the participation that occurred in the 70s and in the 80s in the period of the rehabilitation of the historic center. I think that, I mean, there was not a real participation process, but this is my impression.
Okay, thank you, Daniele. Thank you, the two. I think that we should move to our next presenters. Flávia Brito Nascimento from the University of São Paulo is here, and she will say a few words to present her students of the University of São Paulo.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Congratulations for the presentations, the previous presentations. It was very interesting discussions, and it's a great pleasure to be here in this student webinar. And so it's my great honor to present my students. They've been participating in the first session, the first course we gave last year at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro with Monica and Vera and the other colleagues also. And this year, this edition, the University of São Paulo, they've been active, they participated in the course, and they are all the four today, they are graduate students at the program of architecture and urban planning in the heritage field. So Ana Paor, she will present on heritage and housing, social housing from the beginning of the 20th century. Julia Anversa will present on gender and heritage in São Paulo as well. And Bruna Bassetti will discuss urban planning and urban conflicts in São Paulo. And finally, Marina Brandão, she studies political policies, heritage policies in Brazil in the federal level, and how it is connected to the developing issues in third world countries. So they all discuss contemporary issues of heritage in Brazil. And so I think they might contribute substantially to this discussion. And I thank them all for being here and for being all so much interested in this new heritage discourses and approaches that we've been dealing for the last, let's say, 7 months. So thank you very much, and good presentations to you all. And so, so the first one is Ana Paor. And should I just move on and leave the floor to her, Monica, or do you want to say something?
Thank you very much, Flavia, and thank you to all the students for their interest. I just want to move the floor pass the floor to Ana so that we can have their presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, can you hear me fine? Is it volume okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I've been having many microphone problems lately, but better to check. So first I want to thank you for the organization of this presentation and for making it possible for me to present my work. Let me just get here. Yes, okay. So thank you. Here is morning, but I assume it's afternoon and evening everywhere else. So good evening, morning, and afternoon. Thank you. And just for some context, as Fabio has said, I am an architect. I'm starting my master's degrees for now, and I work mostly with housing history, and I will do some exploration on the heritage concerning my research. And so I research a type of housing provision that in Portuguese is called vilas operárias. They are small groups of houses that were elaborated as an answer to a housing crisis in Brazil in the beginning of the 20th century, as industrialization was quickly becoming bigger in the cities. And this phenomenon also happened in other cities across the world, and housing solutions were developed in many places, all with different forms. And so these houses, they were conceptualized and built for urban working classes, and be them factory workers or not, and they were confirmed as a third way of housing that was neither these elite houses that were really big with gardens, nor the precarious tenements of the time. So they were envisioned to be this third way, this new sanitary way of living. They were small houses built in sets, one next to the other, and often with internal streets that cut through the block. In these images here, I've brought to you an example of one of these villas that I've studied. And it's possible to see, yes, the internal aspect of it. It's entirely inside the block. And they should have, according to legislation, at least 3 rooms, one of them being the kitchen, and some type of sanitary equipment, not yet a bathroom at the time, but something like a water closet or something similar. This one in particular has 4 rooms, is a little bit bigger, and the bathroom, the external water closet. When I first started studying this house, I was often faced with 2 questionings, more or less. One, that the subject had been already fully studied in the 1980s in Brazil, and the second is that there was no relevance in studying these types of houses that were built by private private constructors. These 2 questionings I suffered, I started calling them the forgotten narratives surrounding these houses. The first a matter of naming, and the second a matter of invisibilization of one type of these houses. Houses built under the name operário can be characterized in 2 different groups, the factory villas and the private villas. Factory villas were the ones built by factory owners to create accommodation for their own workers in schemes that resemble those of the British company towns, which are a bit more better known internationally. Private villas, however, were built by private constructors as a form of income. They are smaller, and we will talk about them a little bit more shortly. Factory villas were the ones that became more associated with the term operário. They are also more studied, especially in the 1980s, as many other studies about the industrial working class are being developed in Brazil. This focus of the so-called factory villas in the 80s led to an association of the term operário to factory workers. However, the term in English simply means workers, and it started its life in the same way. It started its life in the turn of the 19th to the 20th century as a term to refer to an urban worker in a more general form. So the casas operárias, villas operárias, were nothing more than workers' houses or houses for the working class, which at the time were quite diverse in São Paulo. But as operário entered the lexicon as factory workers, the houses bearing this name became immediately associated to factories, which recent studies have shown to be not completely true. This strong association has led me to being advised on several occasions to steer away from the term in my research, even though it is the most historically appropriate one, and that no other term has been established for the private-owned villas. This is the first invisibilization of these houses that I identified. Their name was associated with something that is not exactly what they are. but they are still how they are called. So it leads to this problem. They are not operaria, what are they? As of now, they are simply invisible. My focus on the private villas, they are more common and more widespread in the city. They are smaller, so they happen more often. And at the time, they started being constructed at a time in Brazil where there was a big resistance to government interference in housing, which was seen as a matter that should be resolved by private actors. But as conditions in housing decreased fast, there was no way around the problem anymore, and government had to start to interfere. And they did that by creating a set of laws that gave financial benefits and tax exemptions to those who built hygienic houses that became the villas. This led to a building boom of sorts of private villas that were built by small anonymous constructors and occupied by regular anonymous workers. With anonymous constructors and residents, these houses also became forgotten in a way. Few studies have been developed on trying to understand who were the people that lived there. And even though they still are a very common form of living in São Paulo, there is very little discussion about them. A narrative was also created that being workers' houses, they should only exist in workers' neighborhoods. So they was the only place you could find them would be in traditionally workers' neighborhoods of the city, which is not true. As I said, they are widespread. You can find them everywhere in the city. And those that do exist in those neighborhoods, they are considered normal, expected, nothing out of the ordinary, and as such, not worthy of any type of recognition and listing. They are often put aside next to their factory counterparts, which are more well-known and more researched. When it comes to listing when it comes to listing and making them heritage in a way, we have a few, but most of the ones that are listed are factory villas. These anonymous houses and their anonymous actors, the residents, the builders, the financiers, were often considered not good enough for heritage. And the few private villas that are listed in the city are so because of reasons other than this social and historical discussion around them. But I would argue that it is exactly because they are common that they are important. They tell a story that famous housing types cannot. And as they are being destructed and modified, this important historic discussion surround them disappears as well. Just to mention that this is a famous painting by Brazilian painter Tarsila do Amaral, which is a little bit after my period of studies from 1933, but it shows these anonymous workers of the period. And you can see their faces blending in with city and industrialization behind. And what does all these discussions of villas mean for heritage? The workers' houses' ambiguous condition in historiography has led to its erasure from official heritage and in some levels to its place in historiography itself. The disassociation between factory and private villas meant that the first were more easily considered heritage and preserved than the former. Those houses that were once a symbol of what existed of more innovative and that represented a new way of living for a farming urban class in São Paulo became common with time. Its rich history, international network of development, and important social discussions were forgotten. The intangible heritage of the new ways of living that those houses proposed is almost completely forgotten, and this architecture being considered common and unworthy of conservation and listing left the tangible heritage unprotected. I have taken in my first research a closer look to 6 exemplars of these houses. This is one of them, and I have showed a few others during the presentation. And I'd like to use my final minutes to actually show another one. This is Vila Operária São José. I don't have pictures from when it was built, but this is the drawings from the project. And it was built around 1912, and it was once an ensemble of 90 houses, occupying almost half a block in the neighborhood of Moca, a traditional workers' neighborhood in Brazil, in São Paulo, sorry. It was listed as possible heritage in the 1980s, more or less, but never officially became one. And today, it is greatly transformed. Most houses share no resemblance to the original ones, and its entire middle section was demolished to make way to a warehouse. And here you can see. And its rich history was forgotten, and it's now inaccessible to its residents. Just to show a little bit, this house would be the one closer to what the original one would be, but you can see it's greatly damaged. And others, they usually now have a second story, and they have a lot of changes made to them. This one has no resemblance. When we look at those houses today, there is no sign of its historical importance or of the place it once occupied in the construction of a proposed new modern city as it was envisioned in the beginning of the 20th century. They are now seen as precarious areas of the city, and without protection, they could suffer even more damage or even disappear to make way for larger building complexes and more warehouses. I'd like to finish with something that we was discussed in our study group that Flavia organizes, and that is the difficulty in talking about housing as a heritage, and especially those housing types that are more common and therefore less seen. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for your great work, and also to highlight the important issues of the invisibility of our heritage, of daily life heritage, the quotidian heritage. So thank you very much. I'll pass to Flavia.
Just move on to, I think it's Julia Versa or Bruna. I'm not sure. Yes, it's Julia Versa, and she'll do her presentation. She just finished her master's on gender and heritage in São Paulo in a specific case study about a museum. So Julia, it's with you.
Hello. Good morning. I will ask if you don't mind to turn off my camera because I'm concerned about my internet signal. So if you don't mind, I'll turn off. Let's see. So I want to thank our organizers and panelists for sharing this session with me. I'm very happy to be here and hearing your projects and researchers. They are all rich and with some questions that dialogues with my research. Well, my name is Julia, and I'm an educator and architect from São Paulo. And as Flavia told, I am sharing some questions that were important for my master research that I finished last year. The aim of the investigation was to understand how the memories of Domitila de Castro Cantimelo, the Santos Marquesa de Santos, were used to value her former residence by actors such as heritage institutions, professionals, and citizens. So I started this of the Solar da Marquesa, which is located in the center of São Paulo. Now it is open to the public as a city museum, but is a place that undergone many transformations since its construction. And the first documents about the existences of the building was from the early 19th century. It was home to wealthy families, including the Martinez family from 1834 to 1867. And after she passed away, her family sold the house to the church, and then it was occupied by the gas company for nearly 6 decades in 20th century, before its listing process. And since 1992, the building has been operating as a city museum. The City Museum of São Paulo is a public museum formed by 13 historical buildings around the city, as we can see on this map. The Solar da Marquesa is one of those buildings dedicated to the city history and contemporary issues on heritage, memories, and citizenship. But the main point for the educational team during my experience there was the conflict between what visitors wanted to see at the Martinez home and what the museum planned for its exhibitions. The memories of Domitila, a famous woman character of Brazilian imperial period, were important to people who were there looking for her stories, habits, and private details of. And for these visitors, regardless the many actions promoted by the museum, the building was always a space that frustrated their expectations. And because of it, the educators had always had an essential role mediating people's desires and the reality of the historical site in order to discuss information brought to the museum, especially regarding on gender issues. This picture on the right side is the main entrance of the Solar da Marquesa nowadays. It's a space for exhibitions, and in this time, in 2018, it was a photographic exhibition. Then one of the main questions about my research, for my research about the place, was what the institutions responsible for the site, like the Heritage Institute of São Paulo that was responsible for the listing process, and the City Museum wanted to preserve there, and why it did not correspond to people's desires as we perceived as in our educator work there. I found out that in the time of the listing process, the building was valued by its materiality, as one of the last family houses still remaining in the center of the city. So it was basically an architectural issue about this preservation. And about the museum, it seemed to me that it has not yet certain about its intentions as a museum of territory, because the museum was supposed to discuss citizenship and historic issues about the city, but during the last 3 decades, the Martinis appeared there in some exhibitions and events, especially celebrity ones. So she was there, but he wasn't there all the time. And the visitors often remember those appearances and claim for long-term exhibitions and more details about her life. And this picture, the right side is some of these concerns, the visitor her things, her objects, and her histories in this place, which was her former house. In fact, I started the research knowing that the clues about her that people often look for during the visit were somehow tricky or treat. In these pictures, we can see some details of the building that could be related to her life due to its female appearance, not female, but yes, in the common sense, female appearance, or even because of the intimate gestures like the bath and the linked to its intimate life. But no one of these details are certainly related to her life, which causes misinterpretations and mistakes. And that because of the expectations brought to the museum to meet a famous noble woman who was portrayed very often on books, movies, and popular Brazilian soap operas, sometimes as a heroine with some sexual traces and other, let's say, irresponsible interpretations of women stories at all. Sorry. In conclusion, I don't think that the museum needs to match all of those visitors' desires, and even less to be a place where we celebrate memories of a single woman. I understand that this kind of celebrative monuments and tributes had a whole in heritage approaches, but it does not correspond to contemporary issues in the field. But the museum can be a place where it's possible to discuss properly some questions that people bring based on their experience and reference, including the problematic gender issues related to women in general roles in our society. Because the Martinis can be this woman that they seek, but they seek in the house, but we can use these references and this needs to know more about her to discuss other forms and other women roles in our history and our society, not only this famous one, but our daily contributes to society and so I think this. I'm sorry for the camera because I don't think my internet's working very well.
Thank you very much, Julia. And with no further ado, I'll move on to Bruna's Bassetti presentation on planning and heritage in São Paulo.
Okay, I'm just gonna share my screen. Just a minute, please. And yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We are all over the world, so I don't know. And it's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Bruna. I am an undergraduate student at Architecture and Urbanism College of University of São Paulo, Brazil. And this essay was funded by PUB-USP between August 2019 and August 2020. And it's part of the discussions from the Cultural Heritage History and Critique Research Group, which is coordinated by Professor Flávia Bitt do Nascimento. And this research main object was to investigate the Santa Efigênia district patrimonialization path through the Santa Efigênia's heritage listing process drawn up by the State of São Paulo Heritage Agency, also known by CONDEFAT. Opened up in the year 1986, the process remains until the present days, involving tensions and conflicts that stand as obstacles to its definitive approval. So, and here highlighted, we have Santa Efigênia, located in the very heart of the city of São Paulo, at one of the oldest neighborhoods in the capital. Here we can find the Gilles Prestes station and Luz metro and train station, which are two extremely important architectural symbols for the city. And in this area, we also have cultural equipment like museum, a concert hall, and a public garden. Here are Pinacoteca and Jardim da Luz. Here beside, we have the historical triangle, or the old center, like we used to call, which is the first settlement of the city, followed by the Santa Efigênia itself. And these two portions are linked by the Santa Efigênia Viaduct, which connects both sides of Anhangabaú Valley, which is here. And the other districts nearby Santa Efigênia are República, Campos Elíseos, Bom Retiro, and Luz. So, just a minute. So the Santa Efigênia's patrimonialization path can be divided in three parts, which represents its two principal moments of debates. the listing process in 1986, the review period during the early 2000s, and the current stage nowadays. This almost 40 case process is marked by conciliations and clashes between the urban space action forces of preservation and transformation, and it also gathers a wide range of interests from the different social actors involved in this urban dynamic, such as the municipal governments, the state government, entrepreneurs, local dwellers, building owners, traders, users, researchers, and many others. So, and the first and the second moment is clear the collision between preservation and renovation actions, and also the municipality position more aligned to the private and the market interests than to the collective agendas themselves, as in the proposal of the reurbanization project in 1986, or even the context of Nova Luz urban plan during the 2000s. And in both cases, the advance of the urban space modifiers initiatives submired the preservation actions to a suspension or a waiting stage, practically forcing the heritage agencies to back down in their proposal for the neighborhood protection, resulting in controversial exclusions and in the failure to formalize the preservation process. But despite these complications, all the studies produced over these 40 years represent advances added to the final proposal, which is more diverse and suitable to the profusion of cultural reference of this neighborhood. The intervention guidelines have gained greater specificity, revealing the technical concern both with the valorization and preservation of the historical ambience of the place, and also with the safe integration of the patrimonialized goods to the transformation of the city. And here we have some examples of what was listed in the last protection proposal, elaborated in about 2017. And by these images, we can tell that Santa Ifigenia is a neighborhood that gathers several historical layers, and its urban fabric and in its urban fabric, I'm sorry, and also preserves morphological memories, architectural memories, landscape memories, and social memories from the process of formation and transformation of São Paulo. So its buildings, the urban fabric, and the diversity of occupation and uses and appropriation of this territory give to this place a plurality of meanings and values worth of preservation. And now I picked up two specific points that I would like to emphasize. And the first one is the opposition between the monumental heritage and the everyday heritage, which has a massive presence in this whole area, because different from its surrounding areas, as the Luz, which stands out for the strong presence of the monumental building, as we see here, represented by the Júlio Prestes station, or even in Campos Elíseos with its palaces and other buildings remaining of the elite's occupation in the early 20th century. So different from that, the current consolidated urban complex in Santa Ifigenia is an evidence of the daily occupation of the cities and of the commercial and the service activities historically connected to the railroads nearby, and also of the lower and the middle classes' way of living and housing. And the second point is related to the consequences of the almost 40 years heritage listing process. I think it's important to note that the slowness of the heritage agencies in defining a final preservation proposal for this urban area corroborates for its material ruination and for the local cultural references forgetfulness process. So based on the panorama of the actions that took place in Santa Ifigenia in these last 4 decades, it can be understood that the phenomena of mischaracterization and degradation of the built environment was in part generated by the public power itself, either by the state government when not standing firmly before its responsibility of protecting the area, or by the municipal government that often produces and publicizes stigmatizes discourses about poverty and abandonment of this region and its surroundings that would justify huge transformations intervention, like happened, for example, during the Nova Luz context. So to conclude, I would like to emphasize that here in Brazil, the heritage listing instrument is until today one of the most efficient forms of defense and maintenance of the physical and symbolic memories from the socially constructed spaces that face these permanent pressures of interventionist and transformative neoliberal urbanism. So following this logic, the Brazilian cities nowadays are constituted as true battlefields between forces of preservation and renewal. And Santa Ifigenia is one example of those places that holds these daily disputes, being the same measure a historical and a dynamic neighborhood. Therefore, its patrimonialization process could not fail to reflect such characteristics of complexity and conflict so inherent to this territory and to the heritage field itself. So that's all. Thanks for your attention. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Bruna. And I'll pass to Marina Brandão, which is was a former graduate student at the University of São Paulo. She has just finished her master's thesis. So Marina, I'll leave the floor to you. Thank you very much.
Me unmute. Hi, good morning. Not sure if you can see my screen yet. I don't think so.
Not yet.
Oh, okay. Sorry. No. I think I'm having some issues with my. Yeah, I think I'm gonna start I had for a presentation. For some reason, I'm having trouble sharing the screen. I think it's Zoom's secure systems. Wasn't sure, but yeah, since we don't have much time, I'm just gonna start presenting, and then
maybe I'm not sure. Are you allowed to present? I don't know if Landi can check it out if you are allowed to present. Or... Okay, okay. Thank you, Landi.
Yeah, so
it's not that. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, I think it's my systems permissions. But I'll start by just a second. Maybe if I can, Bruna, I'm going to send you by WhatsApp. It's okay if you can you?
Of course.
Thank you very much. Sorry. So I just sent it to Bruna. I'm going to start present and just speaking while she can share her screen. Thank you very much, Bruna, for the help. And so good morning, everybody. It's truly an honor and a pleasure to participate in this event. So when preparing this presentation, some questions were proposed as a general investigation, like for reflection, such as who defines heritage, who is it for? And so my research carried out between 2018 and 2020 focused on how public policies for development can consider heritage to assure that it plays its part in improving life quality in local communities. So with that in mind, my research entitled Heritage as Part of the Development Agenda and PAC-CH in São Paulo, Strategies and Debates in the 2000s, seeks to investigate the relation between heritage, cultural heritage and development agenda in Brazil. It focuses on the works and the strategies carried out by FAM, which is the Brazilian National and Historical and Artistic Heritage Institutes in the 2000s, by approaching a specific program that I'm going to reference to it as PAC-CH, which is, thank you, Bruno, which is, so the CH in PAC-CH stands for Historic Cities. In a more literal translation, it could be translated as some growth acceleration program. I'm going to explain just a little bit of the program to make a sense of why it was relevant to my interested in these issues. But if you could please move to slide number 2, thank you. So PAC-CH was a federal program aimed to finance the conservation and requalification of historical sites recognized as national heritage by FAM in Brazil. And during the implementation phases of the program, development was frequently used as a key discourse. The program, the heritage line axis of the program was implemented in 2009 by the Brazilian Ministry of Planning in partnership with a firm. And it was a part of a larger program created in Lula's administration in office called PAC, which is the Acceleration Growth Program in 2007. So this larger program created in Lula's administration was a part of a development policies implemented in his second term in office, which focused very much on infrastructure in many areas. So in 2009, after negotiations and following up another program to finance heritage qualification works called Monumenta, in what can be considered a window of opportunity, a specific line for heritage was created in PAC. And part of my motivation to study this program was to understand how heritage was being considered in such a broad program that was invested in the construction of roads, airports, and other large infrastructure projects. So I have, just to illustrate this idea, I brought some covers of publicity works in PAC, like the broad main program, and also PAC historic cities that have show some sort of other aspects of the program. So Bruno, if you can move on, please, to the next slide. So some key issues of, based on the selected bibliography and the official documentation of the program, the research analyzes the program's operating structure while focusing on the mobilization of the development discourse in each of the implementation stages. It also deals with other public policies carried out by FA in the 2000s, which were a particularly important moment for heritage public policies in the country. So some of the key issues are how heritage policies are articulated with other public policies, especially those of a social and economic character. How does the concept discourse, and what aspects of the implementation programs allows to observe the identification between heritage and development. In this case, considering the participation of the cities in São Paulo selected to be a part of it. Can we move on to the next one, Bruno, please? Thank you. So the program had two main stages of implementation, one between 2009 and 2010, called action plans, or plano de ação in Portuguese, in which the cities applied to participate directly in the program by enrolling in a 4-stage action plan that consider diagnosis, main goals, actions, and a final contractual stage. All cities that had some sort of recognized heritage site, both tangible or intangible heritage, were able to participate in the program. So in the map, there is the very light yellow circle. I don't think you can see very much from this, but we can see that it's throughout the whole entire country. Some regions have a more abundance of recognized sites, which is a question in itself. If you can move on to the next one, Bruno, please. So yeah, this stage was defined by FA as a strategic plan to orient the preservation policies in the sites, considering a bottom-up approach. As perceived in the analysis of the documentation, cities were advised to include other demands in a way that heritage was being approached as an axis for development. It is important to say that this has a deep relationship with how other cultural policies were being made during Lula's term in presidency. If you can go back to the map, please. Just the other one. But yeah, this one also works. Yeah, thanks. In 2013, the program was reviewed, considering political and economic aspects in the country. So in this context, from a spectrum of 173 cities, it was narrowed down to 44 cities in the entire country, the brown dots. And now we can move on to the heritage map. Yes, thank you. So yeah, so considering the main topic of this event and the seminar, I would like to bring just one of the aspects of the research that was the selection criteria for the second phase of the program that went from 173 cities just to 44 with actual finance to do the works in the heritage sites. So yeah, and World Heritage sites recognized as World Heritage was considered as one important criteria selection for this stage of the program. And some critics of this program and that study PAC and other programs in Brazil identified that this process was a way to invest in the same old places that already were packed with investment or and had yeah, something like that. And also main events such as the Olympics and World Cup were considered to be a criterion. So, and this map you can see an overlay of the World Heritage in Brazil, and the brown dots are the cities selected to the program. So also to balance out this sort of criticism, I would like to bring out that it's important to bring out IFA's efforts to try to diversify the heritage that it's considered to be indicated to be part of the World Heritage list that more recently tried to incorporate other aspects of Brazilian culture and heritage, such as Black, Indigenous, and also working class, but it's still not as predominant as the, let's say, traditional the heritage related to the colonization process. So yeah, thank you. Can move on to the next one. And just to bring out some of the cities in São Paulo that were selected in my research. And as I reach the end of the presentation, I would like to bring some other important aspects of the research. So for me, we can move on to the next one, please. Yeah, so it's Iguape. Yeah, thank you. I would like to bring up some important aspects of the research. It was important for me to understand what was being considered as development in the discourse associated with the program, since its meaning can change over time and place, and even some authors consider it to be an amoeba concept. We have sustainable development, economic development, social development, etc. So to sum up, I identify two main distinctions in the way the programs tend to mobilize this discourse. One is as a finished product approach that I call postcard interventions to focus on the material aspects of the sites, and a second one more based on a local perception that focus on the quality of life of residents that consider different uses for heritage sites. I would like to explain that not necessarily tourism is a bad thing. So the first one is much more related to some tourism initiatives. But we have some important initiatives in sustainable community tourism. But it's also known at this point that some predatory approaches can be harmful and change local dynamics that are associated with this sort of like development perceived as a postcard approach that I was just saying. So I brought the example of cultural landscape of Paranapiacaba village and railway systems in Serra do Mar in São Paulo, that it was submitted in the 2014 tentative list. So mainly has two neighborhoods, well, more areas, but the most, I would like to bring out the two neighborhoods divided by the railroad that you can see in this map. And if you can move on to the next one, we'll have the pictures itself. Yeah, so we have what is called the high part of Vila Paranapiacaba. That's this more, sorry, yeah, mostly occupied, and it's part of the important part of the economic and social transformations of Paranapiacaba, and also the lower part of Paranapiacaba, which has the remaining of the 19th century rail village and railroad systems. So I thought it would be interesting to bring out Paranapiacaba's cases because it illustrates, since in PAC-CH it was considered only actions for the lower part, and the higher part were left aside with no investment from this program. I thought it would be interesting to illustrate this example of this sort of like restorations that focus too much on the material aspects of preservation, and also on tourism attraction, and leaving aside some of the daily life aspects of heritage itself. So in the next slide is just to also illustrate this aspect. We have an tourist express that leads to Paranapiacaba from São Paulo Luz, actually right next to the site where Bruna was presenting in the last presentation, and also some sort of aspects from the daily life that was not considered in the program whatsoever. So, and I think the last slide is the next one. Yeah, and then just like some conclusions very briefly. How development discourse can be used in different ways when implementing a program such as PAC and others carried out by FUN in Brazil. So sometimes development is understood in a more strictly economic approach. And when dealing with heritage, tourism seems to be the more direct link between these two ideas. In other moments, development discourse gains a more broad meaning, considering not only the economic approach, but also social, cultural, and senses of identity. People in itself, which what could be perceived in the first stage of PAC with action plans, workshops, and a more bottom up approach to the program itself. So in that sense, as it has been said many times during these months of lectures and weeks, tangible and intangible heritage is key to understanding heritage as part of the development agenda. Also, the importance of heritage in everyday life, the role of local policies, urban development policies that have to take heritage into account, not only as the exceptional, but the jewelry restored in its perfect shell, or the postcards, as I was saying, but truly understanding as a part of cities' dynamic and identity, articulating with other politics, such as housing, education, health. It became clear that local is a big part of what can be considered what can be considered development policies, the local aspect of the development policies, and how, at least on the first phase, PAC-CH was implemented taking that into account. So to just to sum up, the way the development discourse is mobilizing heritage public policies became then relevant, and it can tell us about how heritage is being perceived and who is it for. Just closing with that picture from a presentation on PAC-CH in 2011 in Colombia. And that preservation is not just about looking at the past, but ensuring that what is worth of being a part of our future remains. So with that, thank you. And sorry for the problem with the presentation in the beginning. Thank you, Bruna.
Thank you very much, Marina. Right now, we have a kind of a problem with the time because we are we passed 15 minutes from our initial plan of the length of the session, but I would like very much to thank you for your very interesting research and dealing with addressing this interrelationship between what is considered heritage and also the urban development, which is something that in Brazil is also an issue of diverse conflicts in our cities and as well in our policies. So it was very interesting approach, and a very I wish you good luck to finish your research. I will pass to Flavia if she wants to comment, and maybe if you have just one or two questions for your.
I think we are running out of time. We already ran out of time, so I would like to thank you all. And I think these presentations can give us hopefully they give us they can give a public from abroad a sense of the complexity of urban preservation in Brazil and the scales of the problems and issues that we have to deal in order to have the past within the future. So there are very intricate questions and sorts of way to approach this heritage in São Paulo and in Brazil. So thank you very much, and also for these students from that they're already presented. I think we had a very interesting panel of what can be discussed and what the new generations are already absorbing and proposing in order to think heritage in different ways. So I think this was just a great session with the students. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for everyone here that presented in this session. And I invite everyone to continue with us. We are going in some minutes to open the other session so that we can have other presentations. So I will pass to Jonathan just to say the last words of this session. And I thank you very much. And thank you, Jonathan, for moderating this session.
Thanks. I see my background has disappeared. I'm sorry. To echo what Monica, Flavia, and Daniele have said, thank you all for participating in this. A really fascinating set of presentations. And I really enjoy the way that you're thinking about the future when you're looking at heritage and the meaning of the heritage in the present and how that goes forward and how it contributes to society, to development and to urban planning. I think a lot of the issues that you've raised are universal issues. And I hope that the connection from China, Turkey, Italy, Catalonia, France, and across into South America has assisted you. And I hope that this can be the start of a youth network, a youth researcher network. And again, as Monica said, please join us in the next session. But in the meantime, thank you so much for all of those inputs. Really, really interesting. And I look forward to hearing much more in the future.
So thank you, Jonathan, once again, and thank you all. Bye-bye. See you in a few minutes. Hope to see you in a few minutes.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much also, Danielle and your students.
Bye.
Bye-bye.